Hey, Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my preview and prediction video for the Week 2 game as we open up at home here at Lincoln Financial Field against the LA Rams. But before we get into that, some of my thoughts about the Rams game are directly related to some follow-up that I wanted to talk a little bit more about from Week 1. So I do want to talk a little bit about that before I get into my prediction. And first things first, one of the things I think we sort of lost in the debacle that was game one was just how well the defense played in that game. Now, granted, we were up against a young quarterback, but the Eagles defense gave up the fewest yards of anyone in the league last week. And they only gave up 3.4 yards per play, which was also league best. In fact, there was a crazy stat that I think Micah Misnelli was talking about on Monday where teams that had averaged less than 3.5 yards per play last year in the league were like 0-18 or something like that. And of those, most of them were losing by double digits. So the fact that we were only giving up 3.4 yards per play and still managed to lose by double digits is absolutely insane. But I think it's really underscored in the fact that Washington had 15 possessions in that game. 6 of those started on our side of the field, and 9 of them started on Washington's side of the field. And of those 9, they only crossed the 50-yard line once, and that resulted in a missed field goal. So the defense really did play a solid game. And I know I didn't do a studs and duds video, so I'm going to quickly recap some studs and duds that I thought deserved to be recognized after that game. So my studs are all really going to be guys from the defensive side of the football or special teams in the instance of number 4, who's Cameron Johnston. I think the punter had a great game. And my number 2 and 3 stud are going to be the companions of the interior of that defensive line, Fletcher Cox and Malik Jackson. I think they played real well. I think they showed that, if Malik Jackson can stay healthy this year, unlike last year, I think the two of them on the inside can really cause problems for offensive lines. So I like them for studs 2 and 3. And then my number 1 stud of the week is going to be Jim Schwartz, because I think he called a great game. And just unfortunately, he got put in some bad situations by his offensive counterpart by making some decisions to put them in bad situations that gave Washington short fields where they were able to score as a result. So all this goes back to why I still blame Doug Peterson the most for what happened. The D was playing well. Your punter was playing well. So I go back to that. I think the game changed on that decision to go for it on 4th and 4 from midfield. You're up by 3 points. You punt the ball. You make them go the length of the field, which they've shown they hadn't been able to do in that game yet. Your punter, I think of his 5 punts, 3 of them went inside the 20-yard line. I roll the dice and take my chances with my defense and my punter in that instance. And maybe the game turns out very differently. After that, Washington, of course, ties the game up. And I think the whole feel of the game changed as a result of that. So I think that we wouldn't have been trying to maybe take as many chances on offense if we were able to pin them deep, get the ball back, and then maybe establish a running game at that point. And while that's all true, and I still blame Doug Peterson the most, Wentz also has to take some blame for this loss as well. I debated actually putting, Wentz, first half Wentz on the studs list, but ultimately decided against that. But Wentz played real well early in this game for the first 28 minutes, and then for the last 32, he was just terrible. He held onto the ball way too long, made some, not very good passes that resulted in the interceptions, and I'll get to one of them in just a second. But ultimately, I think Wentz has to take some blame for this as well, as does Howie Roseman. He's the one that let the team go into that game so undermanned. They looked at Cordy Glenn, who could have potentially come in, and they had to know that Miles Sanders and Lane Johnson were much more of a chance that they weren't going to play than they were letting on, because those guys hadn't been practicing for several weeks. Those injuries just didn't come out of nowhere. So they had to know there was a good chance they weren't going to play. And if that's the case, if you bring in Cordy Glenn, I think you really probably have to try and sign him before you put, a rookie tackle out there who had never, played it down in the NFL, not even in a preseason game. And then, today the news comes out that they're looking at Devontae Freeman for the backfield, who would have been a much better replacement and someone that would have been able to help better establish a running game than Corey Clement and Boston Scott, who are much more sort of receiving backs than they are guys who are going to run between the tackles. So ultimately, I think that, Howie Roseman's got to take some blame for this. So let's go ahead and take a look at the duds then. I've got obviously 5 of them, although one of them is a tie for a bunch of people. Number 5 is going to be Hightower for, I think, making a poor play or poor attempt at a play on the second interception. I think he needs to come back for that ball a little more. And I think although Wentz did not throw it well, I think Hightower could have done more to help his quarterback out there. Since he's a rookie, I'm not going to put him up higher on this list. I think a veteran receiver I'd probably be a little harder on. But Hightower needs to know he needs to try and make that play. And also, number 4, my 4 dud is going to be anyone who played on the offensive line in this game. They played terribly the whole game. I know a lot of it you've got to put at the feet of the play calling and the quarterback play, but I think the quarterback play is also a reflection of the fact he was looking around him the whole game because his offensive line was playing so terribly. So the offensive line is my number 4 dud of the week. My number 3 dud of the week, like I said, is going to be Howie Roseman. He's the one that I think really needed to do a better job of getting the roster in a better position to be able to win this game. I almost feel like they felt like they could go in there with an undermanned roster and still beat Washington. And I think as a result, they sort of overlooked that game, and now it's going to hurt them the rest of the season. My number 2 dud, no surprise, obviously going to be Carson Wentz. For the reasons I stated already, he just needs to he's got to throw the ball away more, especially when things like that are happening. But my number 1 dud, obviously, as I've said before, is going to be Doug Peterson, just for horrible play calling and taking risks that I think were unneeded. So where does that leave us going into this week? I think that a lot of people overreact, I think, to week 1 games in general, but especially this week. Ultimately, I thought the Eagles would win their first 3 games. I still am going to stick to the fact that I think they're still going to win the next 2. I think Lane Johnson coming back and Miles Sanders coming back, which it looks like almost certainly that's going to be the case, that's going to resolve some of the problems on offense, maybe not all of them, because Jason Peters still, I think, is going to need help. But when you're only got maybe one guy you're trying to sort of help, in pass coverage, it's probably a little easier to game plan for that when you've got basically your whole line torn apart. Hopefully Johnson can help anchor that right side of the line, and maybe that also then helps out someone like Herbig or whoever's going to be playing at right guard this week. But I think that that's going to help in that situation. So they should be able to establish more of a running game, especially with Miles Sanders coming back too, who's more of a traditional runner, but can also receive. So I think Sanders is ultimately going to be a big help to the team as well. So I think they'll be able to do much more of the play, have much more of the playbook available to them than maybe they had in week 1. Ultimately, like I said, though, I like the way the defense is playing, and I've got to say that even though it was against a younger quarterback, I think that they should be able to handle this Rams team. This Rams team is not as good as it was a few years ago, and I actually think the Rams might be the 4th best team in that division. I think the Cardinals have taken a jump forward, so I think the Rams might be the worst team in that division. I know they beat the Cowboys on Sunday night, but a lot of that I think had to do with problems on the Cowboys side more so than the Rams. So ultimately, I like the way our defense is playing. I think we can control their offense a little bit. So ultimately, I think the Eagles are going to be able to win this game, and I think it's going to be a little more comfortable than people think too. I'm going to go ahead and say I like the Eagles to win this game 27-16. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think as a prediction for this game. Also, on last week's game, do you think I'm off in terms of who I think was doing well and who I think deserves the blame for that loss? Let me know that in the comments below. And like I said, I'll check in after the game. We'll see what happens. But I like the Eagles in this spot, and I think we win week 2 to get to 1-1 and hopefully right the season. Until I check in after the game, fly Eagles fly.